Welcome to the Alchemist Manifesto, a podcast with Mario Obando and Daniel Topete. We're two friends holding space and making time to have holistic and humanizing pláticas and charlas with the aim of alchemizing our individual experiences into shared healing and wisdom. The amistad that produces this podcast emerges from our shared commitment to social justice as teachers and scholars in the fields of critical and relational ethnic studies, and of course, our creative and everyday efforts to imagine better worlds with our loved ones, communities, and spirits.
Rather than a conventional written manifesto, our podcast welcomes you to an evolving, living, and breathing journey rooted in the beauty of alchemy through amistad and palabras, cuentos and testimonios that emerge in this sacred ceremony of bringing our spirits together and transmitting them with you. We channel and welcome via the spirit of community and togetherness so that we may all find loved ones always close to us, be it here on earth or those that have transitioned. May we always keep them in our thoughts and actions as we navigate through spaces with a smile in our hearts. And like Andrea Echeverria Arias of the Terciopelados so cheerfully sings in their song Play, Pa ti pura cosa bonita, alegría te haga visita. Con buena intención, inspiración, que tenga tu atención. And may every spirit and ancestral energy that tunes in here feel the frequencies of love and liberation we vibrate out in this Alchemist Manifesto. Sending love and peace your way, I'm Daniel Topete. Thank you for everyone who listened to our trailer and our first part of getting to know us. We are honored and thankful for your time and energy. In an effort to introduce ourselves to y'all, we start our podcast journey with interviews of each other. Today's podcast is part 2 of an interview with my co-creator, co-host, and above all, my friend, Mario Alberto Obando. It is my honor to introduce Mario. Our friendship started in the snowy tundra we call Minneapolis, as we both worked toward our PhD in American Studies at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And as I mentioned a bit in part 1 of our interview, growing up in an isolated, hypermasculine spaces that value individual pursuits of success, I was reluctant to let in people into my world. Our relenting spirits would not let that happen. We have grown closer and our bonds have grown stronger as we included each other into our chosen families. Mario is the best. He is compassionate, passionate, loving, caring, super intelligent, brave, self-reflective, willing to grow, willing to be vulnerable, and many other wonderful things. He has been a guiding light when I get lost in my personal isolation. His friendship means everything to me. Mario is an amazing son, brother, partner, and all-around person. He is an amazing writer and scholar. He has helped me with so many edits of my work that I need to start adding his name to my work. I have had the honor to present in his classes. He is an amazing teacher and guiding light to his students. You can feel the comfort and positive learning environment he creates in his classrooms by simply being himself. His work ethic is inspiring. I honestly don't know where he finds the hours and energies in a day to do so much. I have seen him work many hours as a PhD student and still find time to publish articles, pass all his classes, and still find time to spend time with his friends. I have seen him work multiple adjunct positions through LA and Orange County to help his family. Now, he has a tenure track position at Cal State Fullerton in the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. To say the least, that department is flippin' fortunate to have Mario as his peer. Sharing my voice gives me great anxiety, but Mario has always gently nudged me to share myself. He has always made me feel important, even when I try to knock myself down. And for all of this, I am eternally grateful to you. Mario's creative and genius approach to his research is inspiring. His dissertation, Articulations of Responsible Freedom, Black, Latinx, and Chicanx Life and Interior Beyond Status Redemption, discusses the complications of reliance on safety from those same institutions that cause violence to communities of color. He does this in creative ways by conducting deep analysis of music, and music videos, films, poetry. Mario's academic contributions and publications are many. Some are reviews of Maritza y Cárdenas constituting Central American Americans in the Latino Studies Journal, Performing Collisions Ethnic Studies, and Impossible and Unexpected Archive, a special issue on the archiving performance in the Performance Matters Journal. And the most recent publication is titled Archives of Pain, Methodologies of Care, Caring for the quote-unquote gold and the quote-unquote diamonds in the 1992 Notes of El Moreno, in the Journal of American Ethnic History, special issue, Humane Approaches to Undocumented Experiences and Moments. To say the least, this vato has some serious skills. His work is a reflection to the dedication to challenging historical and oppressive structures and to produce better worlds for all, starting with self-reflection. Mario, thanks for sharing yourself with me and the listeners. I want to start by asking some general questions like where you grew up, your experiences growing up in this nation, things like that, I feel like we often don't know simple things about those closest to us, and simply because we don't ask. So here's me asking. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? How was your childhood? Things like that. I know that might be a little bit general, but I wanted to leave it a little bit general for you to go off.
Thanks for that introduction, man. So to your first question, where was I born? I was born in San Jose, Costa Rica in 91, in El Hospital, Mexico, and born to Milena Ureña, my mom, and then my father, who we have the same name. I grew up, those first few years, I grew up in my abuelitos and my abuelita's home in Barrio Naciones Unidas in Chepe, in San Jose. Then my parents decided to get married. My dad was struggling with finding job opportunities and decided to move to the States. My dad was born in 1950 and in Costa Rica, and had moved to the States around 66, 67, 68. I don't know the exact date, but he moved around a lot. But they kind of landed in the Glendale, Burbank area in the late 60s. So when my dad was about 17, 18, he came to the States. So he was very...
Glendale in California, right?
Go ahead.
Well, you said it was Glendale, California?
Yeah, Burbank, Glendale, California, yeah. And in the late 60s, and did a lot of odd jobs, and married his first wife in the 70s, had his first daughter, my sister Janelle. And then after his divorce in kind of like the mid 80s, he moved to Costa Rica, and then that's where he met my mom. So my dad had familiarity with Southern California, and I grew up in Whittier. We moved there because my tío Manuel lived in Whittier, South Whittier, and we moved in that area to be kind of in proximity to really very few family that was on my dad's side. It was really small apartment off Telegraph, and it was my sister from my mom's first marriage, Mili, shout out to Mili, and my brother from my mom's first marriage, Manuel, shout out to my brother Manny. And yeah, we grew up in Whittier. Moved here when I was really young, when I was about like 2, 3, when it was made permanent, and bounced around a lot in Whittier. We must have moved, I lost count a long time ago, but we probably moved around 12 times. And of course, like I said, I lost count, so I think that number is a lot higher. So from the age of like 3 to when I went to Minneapolis, about 23, for those like 20 years, And we had moved around, bounced around apartments and houses, and someone had a connection at the church, and like there's a house and it's really cheap. They're gonna, kind of doing subletting a lot. And yeah, I grew up with, very kind of working class home. My dad sold Bibles and books for a living for the first few years of us being here. And then my mom, when she finally was able to muster some change, she bought herself a car and started driving. She started working in housekeeping out in Orange County. And so she would drive out to Orange County and like Yorba Linda, Placentia area. If you can hear watering outside of the recording, that's my mom. Shout out to mom. Keeping the grass beautiful. And yeah, I went to schools in Whittier. Grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, and some of my first memories in terms of like life in the United States is going to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in La Habra, which was a very it's an interesting place, to say the least. And it's a predominantly Mexican and Central American immigrant church that I went to growing up. And that was kind of this interesting part of my life growing up. And so, kind of I grew up in that system. And so when I went to pre-K kindergarten to about third grade, I went to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, K through 3. And they taught us a lot about theology and, Adventist church is very scholarly, meaning it's a very deep reading of the Bible, very different than Catholicism, which my mom and my dad had grown up in. And so instead of like kind of a ritualistic, sacrament-oriented education, it was very scholarly. So I remember learning the Bible a lot in that period of time, and reading in that space. But around third grade, that's when my mom split from the church, and we had a lot of difficulties kind of making it economically and financially in the States, and we had a lot of issues at home too. And that's when my family split from the church, or at least my mom did, and then my dad kind of had to follow suit. She said she wasn't going to go to Sabbath anymore. And so fourth grade, I went to public school for the first time. And my parents got the address of one of the women that my mom cleaned houses for. And I was able to go to the school above Whittier Boulevard. So I went to the school where there was a lot more social mobility, and it was a culture shock, dude. That's when I really realized I was in the United States. Entering fourth grade was a nightmare. Quickly, I had gotten a very Adventist education at that K through that kindergarten through third grade year, but I didn't have other than that, there was a lot of other things that they weren't pushing. So when I got to public school, it was intense. I was put in at the time, it's not called that anymore, the ESL class. So there was that segregation that happened really quickly of, after lunch, that's when you would go and you were separated from your peers. And that was when I really started feeling different. And that was not fun.
Is that what you mean by that difference? Is that what you mean by that you realized that this was America?
Yeah. Because the SDA, quite interestingly enough, it was I'm going to use the word that folks identified with at the time, which was it was a Hispanic space, right? So it wasn't, Latinos it was Spanish-speaking people. And then I went to public school, and that's when I started meeting English-speaking folks in a very explicit way. And the school above the boulevard that I got the address to was, representative of Whittier, which is this very nuanced and complicated place that I grew up in, of a lot of folks, particularly third, fourth generation folks who've moved really southeast of East LA. And it's kind of like Whittier is the way that I see it after going to college is it's like the borderlands between LA and Orange County. It's like it's the edge of LA County. And then, it really is. And there was a lot of contradictions, being the poorest kid at the most probably like lower middle class school, who didn't speak English very well, didn't read English very well. And the teachers were brutal. And so, yeah, it was that difference. And that's when I learned very quickly words like beaner and paisano and paisa in like a very explicit fashion. You kind of hear that in the community as like love, right? Like, oh, this is un paisa, and that's a homie, right? But when the kids were saying it, that's when you were like, what is that? And then you go home and you ask your parents, and they're like, why were they saying it in that context? And your parents don't really know what that means, because they thought the school above the boulevard was the better school. But that's when I started meeting a lot of folks that had, Spanish last names, very kind of anglicized first names. And I really didn't, at the time, I thought those people were white. I thought they were American. I really thought that a lot of the people I was meeting were white. And then it wasn't until like undergrad where I was like, oh yeah, those were not white people. Those were people who, had this very Americanized way of thinking. And like fourth and fifth grade were similarly probably the saddest years of my life. I have memories of the first days of school, being separated and going to the ESL class. I have memories of standing on the playground, watching everyone play and not having anyone to talk to, and that racialization really kicking in. And so that was like third, fourth grade. Fourth and fifth grade, I went to middle school. And that was really complicated, because that's when you're trying to really adjust. And I really took that al pecho, and really hurt my spirit. And I really was trying to do everything I could to shed that piece of myself. And so that was middle school. And middle school is like some of the worst years of just, I think, anyone, right? But you're just trying to find
your body's changing, right? And then on top of that, having to deal with that difference that you were talking about can be, like you said, it could shatter your spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Minneapolis for my graduation a few years ago, and Terrell Webb, shout out to Terrell in Minneapolis. We were watching this episode of Atlanta, and this episode about a kid who his abuelita, his grandma, buys him like a fake, like a fake jersey, right? And then it becomes the talk of the town, or the talk of the talk of the community and the school in the episode. And I remember sitting in Terrell's apartment in Minneapolis. Both of us were about to cry at the end of the episode, because we're like, that's us. I believe the episode's either late middle school or early high school. And that was me. I've reflected a lot about that time, where you really think that, your mom's really proud to buy you Payless stuff, and you get hand-me-downs. Although I was already outgrowing like my brother's stuff. I'm a little taller than my brother, and I was already kind of outgrowing, so hand-me-downs were not a thing at that. Like I had a growth spurt. And
your brother started your hand-me-downs? There's a thing. Now Manny's wearing clothes.
There was a time where Manny and I shared a pair of Dunk Lows. There was a time that there was an intersection when I was a 9 and he was a 9, and there was definitely that. I think Manny will find that one to be funny to remember that.
I'm getting my shoes, Mario.
Yeah, those were fresh though. But there was this time in middle school where it was, you really start learning that, like, oh, you know, your mom's excitement to buy you shoes at Payless or stuff at the swap meet was everyone's ridicule of you. And it was, I hate to say this, but it was brown folks. There was, of course, there was white folks, but the things, maybe they were also mocking me too, but that was the people that really stung, I think. And so that was like, yeah, middle school was a trip, and very confusing time. And then I went to a private high school to play football. Usually the story is like you go to college to play football, but I went to a Catholic high school to play football, and that was another interesting set of years. A lot of insecurity. I remember my freshman year being obsessed with my wrists and my forearms because they were scrawny in my eyes, and the coaches would always tell me, like, you got to work out, you got to lift weights, and you got to get big, you're tall, so there's no reason why you shouldn't be tough. And I also remember the very first day of like football in high school, we ran laps. It was a really hot day. One of my friends passed out the very first day of football. Poor guy had an 8 and everyone made fun of him. We should have known, like, this is not a place that's going to care for you for 4 years. And, you know, we were running laps, and I remember they started calling me, which is kind of funny. They started calling me Big Bird because I kind of ran like that. I don't know. Yeah, I was like a bobber, but also it's because I kind of ran with like loose wrists, and that's when the coaches were like, feminizing me and calling me homophobic slurs at a Catholic high school, which shouldn't sound like a contradiction, but it is. But it should be a contradiction. But within that tradition, I guess that's very common, right?
True.
Yeah, unfortunately, and also that kind of hyper masculinity. And that's when they told me you need to start taping up your wrists, and they teaching me how to run like a man. And so football was kind of this currency of masculinity and heterosexuality, and this performance of kind of like a type of like militarism that when I look back now, at the time I wasn't aware of it, but I look back now and it was very clear. It was like this, they were prepping you to be obedient. And there was very much the idea was that this Catholic high school was the space where you go so you can be a productive person in society. And it's interesting because a lot of the Catholic high schools in the area, in the San Gabriel Valley, in Pico, Whittier, and also all over really LA or Orange County, they're kind of like their narrative is that they're a good education for the hood kids. There's a lot of brown kids that go there, right? And it was, I went to a high school that was probably 98% Latinx, Mexican American, and that was the currency, and that was rough, especially as someone who was working through questions of identity in that space of around race because of what I was telling you about, middle school, and questions of sexuality and questions of your gender performance, and that affected my relationships with people, especially you're a teenager, you're a mess generally, but that also, all that kind of stuff really puts you into a frenzy, and it's almost like you have all these multiple voices and you don't know who you are. And so my childhood was interesting, but it's something that I look back now as there's a lot to explore, and I'm doing so in therapy.
Thank God for therapy, right?
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just reflecting too, and I think of similar experiences. I mean, my schools were always predominantly Latinx, folks, and having that similar kind of value on whiteness, right, and money, right. I remember during the 90s, there was a store called Miller's Outpost, and they had a brand called Anchor Blue, I think it was, right? And in the beginning, when it first came out, everybody was wearing these striped shirts,
right? Yeah.
Blue, and they started selling knockoffs at the swap meet, right?
Yep.
And they started selling knockoffs at these places and I remember kids like picking your shirt, like your collar, to see if it was an actual Anchor Blue or if you were a poor kid, right?
Oh my God, that stuff was the worst, dude.
And my mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, and then I'm over here asking for Anchor Blue shirts and Jordans, and it's like, no, mijo, I don't think so, right? But again, it another one was the starter jackets. I don't remember if you remember those starter jackets back in the day when it first came out. Everybody wanted those starter jackets, and they were freaking expensive. But yeah, I mean, it's this really. It was from the same community, right? It was this almost race, right, toward this like unequal society that puts value on people because of money and access to these kinds of things. That it was hard. It was a hard thing to kind of go through as a kid that didn't know any better, right? Didn't know that these things cost that much money, and it's like pressuring your parents now. I feel guilty to be like, hey, I want Jordans. Like, no, mijo.
Yeah. And you're in the middle of, you're not conscientious of like how everything works. And I look back
how the kids make you feel, right? And the environment in school that produces that too, right?
Yeah, because they're like, I remember one time in middle school that happened to me, and it was something very similar to the let me check your tag type of thing. And I cussed them out, right? Like as it happened. And for some reason, it was I always got caught after the thing had happened. And I got in trouble for cussing, and then I had detention, and I was pissed. I couldn't, and then I was mad at the teacher because I was like, yo, he just said that to me, but it wasn't. You don't have like the specific like that's classism and this, and it's not like the teachers are having these like wonderful conversations about classism in school. If anything, their favorite kids are the ones who live above the boulevard,
right?
Whose parents picked them up in these nice cars, and my parents had really good intentions, but that was the sad part of those kind of class tensions of that we're all working through. But and then that really builds a sense of resentment that really bothers me. That's really rooted in race and class and immigration. Of you kind of grow up resenting your parents a little bit, and if you don't work through that, you're gonna grow up resenting yourself. And I think that's why it's important to talk about these things now, because we gotta really honor who we are and what we're doing.
We did mention a couple of times that we met in Minnesota in graduate school. What was some of your reasoning or motivations to pursue higher education?
It's a great question. I mean, in high school, the idea was to go to college, right? But as I mentioned earlier, in high school, the culture that I was in, which was a very like hyper masculine football culture, there was this kind of idea that what they were grooming you for was the military, and so there was a time there where I entertained that. I'm really glad I didn't end up going through with that, but I did go to my dad and go, "This is what I want to do," and he was like, "No, you're not doing that." And the flip side of that was then to try to get a football scholarship, and I had some interest, and then I got hurt. I hurt my knee summer going into fall of that season of my senior year. I got really depressed after that. I was like, who am I without the physical exertion of my body as a weapon? Because that's what football was. Football is your body's value because it's a weapon. And that injury, though, it's the biggest blessing in my life, because it was like, okay, well, what are you gonna do now that you really can't run as fast and you can't lift weights you can't do leg day.
Can't skip
and not that I wanted to anyways, but now I really couldn't do it.
Come on, Big Bird, you can't skip leg day.
and so, I had met some recruiters and stuff, but I was also a very kind of closeted poet. I was always writing poetry, and I really liked music, and some of the things that I didn't talk about was I loved Tupac. I watched every documentary about Tupac. I read books, like all of his poetry. I was just obsessed with Tupac. And so there was this kind of, and that was of course my brother's inspiration in the 90s and the 2000s.
Future Tupac episode.
Go ahead.
I said we're gonna have a future Tupac episode.
We got to. We have to. And so I had this like little, bubbling, quiet poet, social justice piece in me, looking back. And I was like, there was something there. And of course, I think it came out of all those experiences that I was having that made me feel that way. And the local college, Whittier College, was always like they were recruiting like students in the community. It's a HSI, so they were looking for quote unquote Hispanics. And I applied really late to Whittier College. I remember like the Common App application was due in like a few weeks, and then I applied and I got in. And I went to Whittier College, and I thought, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I really thought Whittier College was a park growing up. We would drive by it, a really small, liberal arts college, but we would drive by it, and I thought Whittier was a park. I thought Rio Hondo, which is also in Whittier, I thought that was just I thought it was a cemetery because Rose Hills is right next to it. So I didn't really know what college and university was. And I like that specific one, I thought it was a dog park because there was always people walking their dogs. I later came to know that those are professors who take their dogs to work, which is a funny idiosyncrasy of Whittier College. And so I was quietly trying to act tough that I wasn't excited to go to school. But internally, dude, I was like, I don't have to play for my education. I did have a scholarship to go to high school. It was an expensive high school. And I was excited to try to do something other than my body and have concussions. I had several concussions in high school. Untreated, no one cared about. I want to put that out there. Those are untreated. Those were before concussion protocols in the NFL. And I was just excited to like finally try to start over, even though I was really close to home. Right. And so I had the summer. I lost a lot of weight, like the skinniest I've ever been in my life. First day, like orientation, I went to school wearing a Smith shirt. I've discovered the Smiths, and I had discovered kind of like the 80s scene in the late 2000s. And so so I was like in that meat is murder vibe, and I was walking to school, and I was just really open to it. Then I took some history classes, and that was it. Like it was game over. Shout out to Jose Ortega's class, Dr. Jose Ortega in the history department at Weir College. His class on colonial Latin America, race, gender, and sexuality. Shattered, dude. I'm sitting in that class, the basement of Hoover Hall, right off the street that I always kind of, drove by, which is right next to Uptown Whittier. All the different apartments we lived in that area. We're in the basement of the Hoover building. That basement famously always has like flooding, so it always smells like mildew. I was like, what am I doing in this class? Like, we're waiting for the professor, and in comes this dude with long hair, and he's brown, and he's chill, and he's like, what up? I was just interested because he was there, and I had never seen someone that literally looked that way teach. And that's a commentary on the United States educational system more than myself, right? But then when he started rapping about pre-Columbian history and Mesoamerica, we started reading this book called Mesoamerican Voices. The game was over, dude. I was hooked. I read every word of that one. And we read this essay that I still read today. I still assign this essay. It's Sylvia Marcos's essay, Indigenous Eroticism and Colonial Morality. I still teach that essay because it shattered my world. I was like that the like white women clutching their pearls type of situation. You know what I mean? Like when you're like clutching your pearls. I was a brown kid with the chain on that had a cross on it, clutching my cross. I felt like I was sinning being in that class, but I was super excited. I was like clutching my cross, but I was like, I might not wear this next class because this thing makes me feel something. And he has a way of storytelling that's still unique that shout out to Jose. Really, he has a way of telling stories of pre-Columbian history, and the stories of Columbus and Cortez and all the colonizers and what they did to folks, and really flipped all of my ideas around Christianity on its head and Catholicism. And then go ahead.
So let's bring Jose to tell some stories.
Light them up, dude. That's what it is. That's what it is. For real. Yeah, we would have some cool conversations with Jose. Shout out to Jose. And that I didn't know it then, but that's the moment where I realized that my first 20 some odd years of life I was living under spiritual warfare. And that's when that language started kicking in, that colonialism wasn't just about territories and territorial conquest, it was a colonization of our spirit and minds. Mm-hmm. Now, that destroyed me mentally, and I'm still picking up the pieces. But that moment of that moment of that crumbling at its core, and then me not wearing my cross anymore, and was everything, because I've never looked back from that moment. And then I worked with him, and I majored in history. But I was still very much talking to my friends like, I really want to major in history. That's what's gonna make me happy. I don't know if that's gonna make me money. So I was still in that phase. And I had a friend who was pretty close to finishing up their BA, and they were like, I remember this, I was about to fill my major out. I was gonna major in political science instead of history. And she was like, the night before I was gonna fill out the paperwork, she was like, major in history, you idiot. That's what you love. That's what your gut's telling you. And I did, and then I just like fell fully into it, dude. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with world history, like global history. We had this really dope professor who taught Asian history, and learning that Asia was the center of the world prior to in terms of global commerce and economy, that the reason why the Spaniards came was or invaded the Americas was because they were looking for silver to trade with Asia. The center of the world was China, and the currency was silver, and that's why they were enslaving indigenous people for silver. That, like, I was like, what? And so I fell in love with studying that and knowing that and sharing that, and that really politicized me. And then it was like, cultural studies and pop culture, and that's that time that, where I don't look back at it very fondly because it gave me a lot of headaches, but it was that time where you're walking around and everything means something. Like, you can't watch a movie like, oh, that's product placement, oh, that's the history of this. That gives me a headache right now thinking about that, because now it's just part of my day-to-day life. But those early years really shattered everything for me. But I wasn't all there in terms of my mental health, and so it was really complicated. But I fell in love with making sure and prioritizing that I was proficient in the history of Latinos in the US and Central American history. But then also I wanted to be proficient in all those histories. And I was like, and I also didn't want to be limited methodologically, so I applied to grad school, and it's like, I want to do American studies, and I want to learn about everything. So
Mario, thanks so much for sharing this space with me and those that listen to this podcast. I honor and am grateful for any opportunity to get to know you a little bit more, to strengthen our bonds and our spirits. I look forward to continue this path and journey with you here at the Alchemist Manifesto.
Thank you for sharing your time and inviting us into your day here at the Alchemist Manifesto. Thank you for listening to part 2 of Getting to Know Us. Please stay tuned for future episodes as we continue our journey to transform energies into positive and healing moments. Feel free to share your thoughts, responses, and questions via direct message on Instagram at The Alchemist Manifesto, or via email, thealchemistmanifesto@gmail.com. We love to hear from you.
A reminder that if you feel stuck, that from the mud grows a lotus. A special shout out to Jaime Talavera for the musical intro and outro, and Joel Ureña Mora for your work on our social media. We appreciate you both. Also, a special shout out to my son, the light of my life, Diego Tlatuani Topete Rodriguez, for the cover art to part 1 of Getting to Know Us.
Special shout out to the inspirations of my life, my nephews Roman Arevalo Bermudez, Tomas Arevalo Bermudez, and my niece Jasmine Alia Bermudez Ruiz for the cover art of part 2 of Getting to Know Us. I love you all.